16-year-old Bobby Fischer put Mikhail Tal under serious pressure in this match, but Tal managed to come back, and which results in a great match between him and Bobby Fischer. So Tal is playing with the black pieces, and Robert James Fischer or Bobby Fischer is playing with the white pieces. And this is the Sicilian defense, the modern variation of the Sicilian defense. So after the pawn, the c into d4 pawn is captured, the knight captures back, and knight to f6 by Tal, and knight c3 by Fischer, and a6 by Tal, preventing this the knights and the bishop from jumping here, and bishop to c4 by Robert James Fischer, e6 by Tal, the bishop retreats to b3, and b5 by Tal, now opening up the his pawns on the queen side, allowing the bishop to come here to the b7 square, and f4 by Bobby Fischer, opening up the f squares, attacking the pawn structures on the f square of the black king, and b4 by Tal, forcing the knight to retreat, which allows the capture of this pawn. And after that, castles on the king side, Bobby Fischer, and now g6 is played by Tal here. It was suggested that Tal just brings black his knight back to f6 here. So, but that was not played. Instead, he went for g6, and Fischer immediately plays f5, breaking the pawn structures, trying to break the pawn structures on the king's side, basically, and leaving the king vulnerable. So, g into f5 is played by Tal, and the knight captures the pawn. So this looks like a sacrifice, but if you capture this knight like this, the queen will come in here, threatening the uh, capture of the knight, not the knight, the threatening capture of the rook here, and also creating a checkmate right over here. So the rook, let's say the rook move here, and then the queen will go to d4, attacking both these rook at the same time, and you lose one of these rooks, and it's undefendable. So after this knight takes f5, the rook comes to g8 again, bringing the queen to the c7 square was better, and that was better basically, but then happened, and bishop to d5 again is played. So here you could just capture this bishop if you want to, and the following combination will result basically. An earlier combination will listen, but that line didn't happen. So after that bishop move, the bishop after the bishop move, the rook comes here, rook was attacked, the rook comes to a7, and the knight is now captured. uh, this allows the capture of the attacked knight, and bishop captures that pawn, and the rook comes to e7, protecting the king from any nasty checks from the Fischer's rook. And now the bishop takes the bishop, and the queen takes the bishop back, and bishop to f4 is played by Bobby Fischer. Here it was suggested that he plays c3. It was a better move, but didn't happen. Now this allows the queen to c6 move by Tal, and for some because I think in this position Fischer did some miscalculation, and so once this knight is gone, it is okay at the moment, because the bishop will capture the pawn, and because the rook is here, rook is hanging, and also the knight is also hanging here. So after the queen comes back to c6, this knight is captured back. So now it's not a problem. But after this, the queen goes to b6 with a check, which allows the captures of this bishop back, and basically Fischer is a major piece down. And after the following checks, the capture, this rook comes and captures the f7 square, and the king had to capture. And once the king captured, the queen comes to e6 with a check, and after the king moves away, this rook is captured back, so you get a pawn extra basically. And after that, the queen to d6 move is played, looking to exchange queens basically, because he's already up by a major piece, and exchanging queens could result in a easier game. So Fischer didn't want to go for that, because he'll be powerless, so he went to b7. Now the rook comes to g6, and protecting the king in a better way, and c3 by Fischer, and a5 by Tal. And after the check, the king goes to g7, a little bit more safer square, and queen to c4 by Fischer, and the bishop goes to d8 now, protecting this weak backward pawn. So after the pawn get captured, the pawn captures back, and g3 by Fischer now. So now this allows this queen to c6 plus, forcing the exchange of the queens. So what now happens is the rook comes to e4, covering the check and also protecting the queen. So once the queens get taken, the rook can take back and with an attack on the pawn here, activating the rook at the same time. So the rook to b6 is now played, defending the passed pawns. Oh, the king started coming up the board, and the position becomes like this. And now the Tal brings his extra bishop on the board and places a check, and the king goes to e2. This allows the king to d5 move, attacking the rook, and now the king comes up to d3, because if you earlier you brought your king right away like this, and if the king moves here, you will have to move your rook, and your position will be a little bit uh, bad basically. So now once you bring the king here, it's okay to bring the king back, supporting the rook. So bishop to f6, attacking the weak backward pawn over here, and now the rook goes to c2. It was better to push the pawn to b3 and creating this pawn structure, which also prevents the passage of this pawn. But didn't happen. So after that, bishop to e5, attacking the pawn structure, preventing this the passage or pushing of any of these pawns. So if you push this pawn, if this pawn will be gone, and pushing this pawn will have an attack on that particular backward pawn, and this push is a very powerful piece. So the rook comes to e2 now, and rook to f6 by Tal, with the intent of checking the king, and the rook goes back to c2 by Fischer, and once the check happened, the king goes to e2, and the rook again comes to f7, and the bishop goes to d4 and a3 by Fischer. Now I think he was looking to exchange that pawn, to get the pawns exchanged, so that you can have a pass pawn of your own on this side, and which you can push and create additional pressure on the board. But instead of taking the pawn, b3 was played, attacking the rook. So the rook comes to c8, looking for checks against the king. So the bishop took that b2 pawn, which was hanging. So after that, the check happens, and the king comes down to c6, and this pawn, which is undefended, is attacked now with the rook. So the check results f3 check, and the king comes to c4. So now, as of this pawn is attacked twice, and it's only defended once by the rook. So in normal cases, you can take this pawn, but after that, rook to c3 plus by Tal, which basically pushes the king away into the there are only two squares. Either you can go to b4, or you can just go to d4 here. So if you go to d4, you will lose this pawn on a discovered check, and you'll have to go here again, and the check repeats. And after that, you will have to come here again anyway. So instead of going to the b4, instead of going to the d4, b4 was played, which actually prevents the attack of the rook on this pawn. And now the king goes to c7, attacking the rook, and the rook comes up to b5, closest to the king. And now this move by Tal, bishop to a1, and which allows this pawn to push forward, and a4 by Fischer. And once this b2 is played, Fischer basically resigned. But yes, this rook is hanging, and but if you take the rook, and the next move, the pawn will queen. And yes, this rook is attacking the queen. You can take it, but it's a check, and it's a force move. And because of this force move, you will have to either close the check with your rook, or which will lose the rook, or you'll have to move the king away. So once the king moves, the queen come to a2 and just check, and game is basically over. And that's what happened. And as of this move, Fischer resigned the game, because he saw what's going to happen, and then most of the GMs won't play it on the board. So that was the game. A very interesting match, in which Tal was under serious pressure earlier in the game due to Fischer's moves on the pawn moves on the king, exposing the king, and also some very good tactics from Fischer's side. But Tal was able to get away from that particular kind of attack, leading to his victory during this end game by using his superior experience. Basically, Fisher was like 16 years old in this game, so basically he would have lacked some experience on what was going on, and which basically results in Tal's victory. Nothing to take away from Tal, great player, and thanks very much for watching. We'll be back with more such videos.